CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Face to face, but not eye to eye. Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin meet for a high-stakes summit.
Our other headlines: an anxious wait on Wall Street as investors look ahead to the latest US Federal Reserve statement.
An outbreak of COVID-19 in China threatens to disrupt the global shipping industry.
China names the astronauts preparing to spend 3 months on its new space station.
And a walk on the wild side, the team that's gone from fighting fires to following elephants.
So the summit is over. Now the press conferences begin. Vladimir Putin is giving his news conference right now, and we're expecting a separate one from Joe Biden following the meeting of the two presidents in Geneva.
It's the first time the US president has met the Russian leader since entering the White House. CGTN's Tony Waterman is following the story from Lake Geneva. So, Tony, the talks are finished already, and now Vladimir Putin's press conference is underway.
Yeah, finished already. Much quicker was this summit than White House officials were expecting. They said talks could last up to 5 hours. The total talking time, less than 3 hours. What we're getting out of these press conferences right now is how things shook out. What you're looking at is President Putin's press conferences. These are live images that you're seeing. What we've heard from him so far, he said that there was no hostility in this room when they were talking about some very contentious issue. In fact, he called the talks quite constructive, and although they didn't see eye to eye on a number of issues, there was a willingness to understand the other person's point of view. President Putin also said that they have agreed to start a consultation on cybersecurity. This was one of the main issues for President Biden after a series of ransom attacks on U.S. infrastructure, also election meddling. The details of that, we are still waiting to hear what this consultation is going to look like, what potentially could be the outcome. He also said that he is aware, that the Kremlin is aware of these cyber attacks, but that Russian authorities have nothing to do with them. When it comes to those ransomware attacks, this is something that U.S. officials have been saying, that the Russian government was not involved in those attacks, that it was coming from people who were living in Russia. And the problem they had with that is that they feel as if Russia is harboring those cyber criminals and would really want a crackdown in that area. They're also going to start discussions on possible changes to the New START arms control treaty. This was something that was signed back in February. It's for 5 years. It was due to expire in 2026. President Putin has indicated that he would like to extend that 2026 deadline, perhaps extend it to include new types of military technology. President Putin also said that there was nothing to discuss on the possible Ukraine membership of NATO. Of course, making that statement just a couple of days after NATO allies met in Brussels for their own summit, where Russia was very much the topic of discussion. NATO leaders, for the first time, saying that Russia is the biggest threat to the alliance. After that meeting took place, the Ukrainian President Zelensky actually put a tweet on Twitter saying that NATO members had agreed to allow the Ukraine to enter, to have membership to NATO. That was something that President Biden quickly tried to play down in the aftermath of that tweet. So where that stands right now is unsure, but NATO allies have reaffirmed multiple times their support for the Ukraine. But this is what we're hearing from President Putin at the moment. We're going to be hearing from President Biden after this press conference to get his side of the talks, how they went for the U.S. When he was leaving the villa after the summit was wrapped up, he was asked by the press how it went, and he said, "I'll talk about it later." So now we're waiting to hear what he has to say.
Well, Tony, as you say, we haven't yet heard from President Biden, and President Putin still talking. So plenty we don't yet know, but it sounds like what has been discussed was, as you say, constructive there. But what haven't we heard about? What are we expecting to hear that we don't yet know?
Well, we still want to know, probably from President Biden, how the situation around the poisoning and detention of Alexei Navalny, the Kremlin critic, how that went down in conversations. There's also things about Belarus. We also very much are waiting to hear about what areas of agreement there may have been. There could have been perhaps on climate change, perhaps on the Iran nuclear deal. Russia has been very involved in those negotiations right now that are taking place in Vienna on trying to revive this nuclear agreement. And maybe even some other areas of agreement on Afghanistan, that both the United States and Russia very much concerned about the security situation as we see NATO forces and U.S. forces withdrawing from the region for the first time in 20 years.
OK, Tony Waterman in Geneva, thanks very much for updating us.
So, as Tony was explaining there, President Putin speaking at his press conference, we hope to hear from Joe Biden a little later. We're also going to take you live to Moscow to get some analysis from our special guest later in the programme. Now, there is one thing that at least President Biden agrees with Vladimir Putin on, and that's relations between the United States and Russia are at a low point, but the president has enjoyed friendlier relationships with previous White House residents over the years. To see more about Vladimir Putin's on-off relationship with Washington during his 2 decades in power, europe.cgtn.com. OK, we're going to take you back to that press conference now, live here on CGTN, where you're seeing journalists putting questions to the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. And we'll just listen in to a little bit of what he has to say.
Can kill to the tune of 120 people. All right, assuming this was a mistake, it happens on a war, but shooting from a drone at an unarmed crowd, clearly the civilian crowd, what is this about? How would you call that? And who's responsible for this? And how would you call this person who is the killer now? All going back to the human rights record. The Guantanamo prison is still operating. It doesn't even start to resemble what is stipulated in the international law or in the U.S. legislation, and yet it exists. Secret CIA prisons across the globe, including those in the European countries, where people were tortured. Well, is this the great human rights record? Oh, I doubt that. Would anyone here would agree that this is how you protect the human rights? But these are facts on the ground, and this is the reality of the politics today, and we understand that this is how it's being done, and on the basis of that we respond. So when people get funding from abroad to stand for the hidden agenda of those who are paying them, who pays the piper. RT now, please. RT, a question about the Arctic. You've mentioned the discussion on this track, and the United States have been accusing Russia of militarizing the Arctic. And so do the United States allies. In March, State Secretary Blinken voiced his concern. So what have you discussed in detail? Well, we've discussed this in an extended format with our aides present, and this is an interesting field. I mean, the exploration of the Arctic and in general and of Northern Sea Route in particular is of huge interest for many countries, not just us in the United States. So yes, the United States have concerns, but they are completely baseless. I mean, these concerns about the militarization are baseless. We are not doing anything new. We are simply restoring the infrastructure that has already been there. All right, we are retooling this, we are retrofitting this, the borderline infrastructure, the military infrastructure, but also the environment conservation and emergency command and search and rescue infrastructure. We are creating the capacity to save people at sea, if that, God forbid, happens, or we're trying to protect the environment.
President Putin live on CGTN, taking questions from journalists following that Biden-Putin summit. They were talking, among many other issues, about human rights and Russia's actions in Europe and around the world. We're going to leave the press conference now to bring in our special guest, Ivan Timofeyev, the Director of Programs at the Russian International Affairs Council, who joins us live from Moscow. Very warm welcome to the programme. Good to see you. And I know this is a very unfair question because we're all watching these press conferences live as they happen. Early days, yes. But what is your reading of how things seem to have gone so far?
Well, my reading is that things are going in a way which had been expected before, so there are no significant breakthroughs in the summit. However, it is going on in quite a constructive way, so the very fact that the two leaders met is already a good sign, and this meeting may provide some sort of a spur for further dialogue on arms control and other issues on the working level and the level of their administrations.
In a sense, it's the outcomes rather than the summit event that matters, isn't it? I mean, I wonder what a successful summit outcome looks like for both sides.
Well, you see, it's hard to operationalize the concept of success for both sides. I think that the very fact that the summit happened is already a success, because the relations are on quite a low level. So the very fact of this dialogue, of this meeting, is a good sign. So I think both sides were interested in this, and the very fact that it happened is good.
I mean, the relationship really couldn't be much worse. We all know the long list of grievances. We've been detailing them earlier on in the programme. I wonder who needs this more? Is it Putin or Biden?
Well, I think both of them need this summit. There has been no talk between the leaders since 2018. Meanwhile, these are the two great powers. And this was Mr. Biden who initiated the meeting, but it was fully supported by President Putin, despite, for instance, the sanctions imposed by the US against Russia, despite all of the problems in diplomatic relations. So it was taken with no hesitation. So I think both were interested to the same degree.
The Trump-Biden era was often characterized as being very close, but in practical terms, I guess that it was strong on warm words. But when the follow-up came from the bureaucracy, there wasn't much content or even progress to report, was there?
Well, this is a very right notice, and very often when US-Russia summits on the highest level occur, there are lots of over-expectations, and then it turns out that things are much worse on the level of bureaucracies. And I wouldn't have any over-expectations today too. So there are lots of problems, and it's very hard to solve all the contradictions on the working level. So I agree that we will face all the same problems we have now.
Problems, there are many, as you suggest. There are, however, areas for both the United States and Russia to cooperate on: climate, COVID, and foreign affairs.
Well, yes, I would add a number of areas such as arms control, such as Afghanistan, such as Syria and Middle East, though there are contradictions there too, counterterrorism. So there are plenty of areas we have their coinciding interests. However, at the same time, there are quite significant disagreements which affect in a toxic way the areas we have coinciding interests.
Ivan Timofeyev, live from Moscow, thank you very much indeed for your analysis. And we do hope to take you to Joe Biden if he speaks later in this programme.
Well, reacting to today's meeting between Putin and Biden, the European Union's top diplomat says better relations and closer cooperation with Russia is a distant prospect.
Today's joint communications proposes to simultaneously push back, constrain, and engage Russia, in that order. To push back, to constrain, and engage Russia, based on a common understanding of Russia's aims and an approach that we can refer to as being a principled pragmatism.
The European Union has agreed to impose additional sanctions on Belarus, targeting 7 people with links to the country's aviation sector. It's in response to the forced landing of a Ryanair flight in Minsk last month and the arrest of a journalist who was on board. Brussels has also approved a separate range of sanctions in response to the country's disputed presidential election last year.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Top US negotiators are in London to hammer out a post-Brexit trade deal. But will the tariffs stay or will they go?
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe, live from London. Just a reminder that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, on YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Growth in China's factory output and retail sales slowed for a 3rd straight month in May. Industrial production was up 8.8% last month from a year earlier. That misses the 9% analysts had been hoping for. Retail sales were 12% higher, but also fell short of expectations. The global semiconductor shortage in the car industry and rising COVID cases in the export hub of Guangdong have both been partly blamed. US markets are braced for the Federal Reserve's latest pronouncements on monetary policy following a 2-day meeting.
The US job market has been weaker than expected, but inflation is accelerating and the economy is forecast to grow at its quickest pace in decades. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. Hello to you, John. So just under 2 hours till we hear from the Fed.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a ritual, Robin and Jamie. It happens this way every time they meet for 2 days in Washington, D.C. It's the Federal Open Market Committee meeting, the FOMC, and they're meeting now. They'll meet again in July, they'll meet in September, November, December, but they'll miss out August and October. And the announcement will come about what they're doing about interest rates at 2 p.m. local time, that's 18 GMT, in about an hour and 40 minutes from now. And then Jerome Powell, the head of the organisation, will address the media. I think it'll be virtual. It may not be. It might be the first time in a while that it hasn't been virtual. We'll see. The Federal Reserve is not, repeat, not expected to alter its interest rate. The overnight lending rate, where the banks park their money while they're all sleeping, is likely to remain as it is and has been for a while, which is basically zero. It's kind of just a little tiny bit up, but basically zero. So the really keen knowledge this time will be, what will the chairman say when he talks to journalists about inflation? And will he change his tone? They will also publish a summary of economic projections, but that's pretty dense bedtime reading. And the advantage of the press conference, of course, is you can look the man in the eye and see what he actually looks like when he's saying these things. So that's where the interest lies today in about 2 hours from now. Robin?
Well, John, as you say, everyone listening out for those comments from Jerome Powell, but what do you think he is going to say?
Well, the big conversation at the moment, in fact, the thing that everyone's talking about, and we have been for weeks here, is inflation. Clearly, it is back. We saw that with the rising prices for airline tickets, for fuel, for clothing, and for food and that sort of thing. But the question is it transitory, which is the Federal Reserve's favourite word, or is it transformational? In other words, is it only temporary? Will it go away? Or is it something that we're going to have to get used to and live with going forward? Now, economists are completely divided on this. Now, here's why. We've had CPI at record levels in May and April. That's the price that we pay in the stores here. And then yesterday we had PPI, which is the producer prices. That's what the people who make things pay in order to get the raw materials to make the things that we then go on to buy. And yesterday that was at an all-time high, never before seen, 6.6% up year on year in May. Now, the Federal Reserve says that this is a supply and demand issue. Okay, we are recovering from something the like of which none of us has ever known, and they're juicing the economy so much that, of course, a level of inflation is to be expected. There are bottlenecks in the system now because people are not going back to work to fulfill the jobs that would ultimately make things and ease those bottlenecks. And the Federal Reserve, and indeed the Biden administration's opinion, is that this will all settle down. What we think here at the stock exchange is that probably the Federal Reserve will not really make any firm decisions on interest rates or inflation, or how bad inflation it is, until September or October of this year. So they'll get through the summer, and then everybody in New York is likely to be back at their desks in September. Let me remind you what they do. The Federal Reserve is mandated to do two things, and two things only: to create as much employment as they possibly can, and to tell the president what they think the inflation rate will be, and then to stick with it. So it's around 2%. So at the moment, we're not quite at 2%, and we're not quite at full inflation. Just finally, economists worry that the Federal Reserve has been asleep at the wheel, that they haven't seen the threat of inflation coming down the pike quickly enough. And in the past, when they haven't, it's led to recession. So those are the two arguments, and that's why there's going to be such interest in what Jerome Powell has to say this afternoon. Robin?
John Terrett, thanks very much indeed.
Well, that's the story of US inflation. UK inflation has jumped to 2.1%, the highest for almost 2 years, and above the Bank of England's target. The Office for National Statistics says the price of fuel was one of the main factors of May's increase. Lockdown easing has also sparked consumer spending as the cost of clothing, food and drinks help drive up prices. Economists fear inflation will continue to rise as consumers spend savings accumulated over the last 16 months. Britain's Trade Minister says she wants to draw a line under the senseless disputes with the United States. Liz Truss is meeting US Trade Representative Catherine Tai in London. Our correspondent Juliet Mann is following those talks. Juliet, we had that major boost for EU-US relations with the Airbus-Boeing dispute being grounded after a turbulent 17 years. Are we expecting a similar UK deal?
I think what we're expecting is a lot of progress on that. I mean, think about it. The wings for commercial aircraft, Airbus aircraft, they're made in Broughton in North Wales, and then they're assembled in Bristol at their Filton plant. So Airbus is really important to UK industry and to UK jobs. Now, if you think of those subsidies that have been suspended, the billions of dollars worth, it's a really big deal. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen herself, you know, she said this is the EU and the US moving from litigation to cooperation on aircraft after 17 years of rowing about it. And by the way, while they were rowing about it, Jamie, they took their eye off the ball and didn't really pay attention to the progress that others were making in building up their industries, others like China. So for the UK to come up with some permanent solution here for industries in both nations really does make business sense too.
So what are the chances of a broader free trade deal at these talks?
At these talks, the chance of a free trade deal are pretty slim. And the reason for that is that there are some real major obstacles, some very big sticking points. What the UK wants is it wants to be able to have easier access for UK industry going into US markets. And the other way around, what they want to do is to bring consumer prices down. So think about it. When you've ordered something from the States, you might have had to pay a tax before you could pick up your parcel. So what they want is to have zero tariffs on a wide range of goods coming into the UK from the United States. But there are big questions over US agricultural products and how much access they're going to have to British markets. And it all comes down to food standards, because US food standards are considered to be much lower than UK and EU food standards. And that's because in the States, they wash their chicken in chlorine and they also treat their beef with hormones. So that could be something that is really tricky. But look, this is an administration that was prepared to resolve this long-running dispute between Boeing and Airbus. So perhaps this is an administration that's prepared to do a trade deal without food. And Jamie, if you're wondering what the UK might have to compromise on, well, the White House has been quite vocal. They've been really raised concerns about the stalemate over the Northern Ireland Protocol, that key part of the Brexit deal, and a real point of contention between the UK and the EU. So the big question, I suppose, is if the US will walk away from a free trade deal if London and Brussels don't sort it out.
Juliet Mann, thanks for that.
The city of Guangzhou in China remains on high alert over resurgent COVID-19 cases, but volunteers are doing their bit to keep their communities running as normal. CGTN's Lu Serui reports.
Among the 7 volunteers at this vaccination center, Chen Sirong is the youngest. She just graduated from high school and says she can't wait to learn more about the society beyond her campus. Chen says she's already been vaccinated and wants to help more people get the jab. Although she's a little bit shy when facing crowds, practice makes perfect.
I planned to go to Disneyland after the college entrance exam, but the trip got cancelled because of the coronavirus. I think I have time, so why not do my part to help the society?
Chen joined previous mass testing campaigns, including in scorching hot temperatures.
I'd only seen the pictures of medical workers soaking in sweat, and I joined them. I realized it's really, really uncomfortable. I think those medical workers are great.
Chen says she understands why people get irritated after waiting in long queues and high temperatures, but she says people should be patient with staff.
I'm an art student, so I probably can't join the medical industry as part of my career. But I want to share my feelings to influence others, to help people understand the greatness of the medical workers.
Despite the strict quarantine measures, Guangzhou's locally transmitted cases are still growing by single digits. But with hundreds of young volunteers like Chen throwing themselves into mass campaigns, many here have peace of mind. Lu Serui, CGTN, Guangzhou.
Disruption in China's Yantian port has sent shivers through the global shipping industry. The port was reduced to a fraction of its capacity due to COVID prevention measures.
Although the situation has improved, delays have caused global shippers to worry that they're in the grip of yet another logistics crisis. Peter Sanders from one of the world's biggest international shipping associations. I asked him to put things into perspective.
China is the key manufacturing hub for exports goods that travels across the globe on container ships. Yantian is situated in the southern part of China in the Pearl River Delta, and it's one of the key exports port out of China. But there are other main export ports out of China, and I guess that is the silver lining to this latest disruption that we see on the global supply chains.
So what is the effect of this disruption going to be? There's talk of shortages lasting until Christmas. Just what will this do to the global supply chain?
I think the whole maritime industry all across the global supply chains, but certainly also in container shipping, have been accustomed to working from one state of emergency to the next, and this breakdown of container throughput in the port of Yantian is just the most recent disruption to that. Heading into to the traditional peak season for containerized exports out of the Far East, I think we are easy off if this only lasts throughout the year. Our expectations are that the current stressful situation for the global supply chains are likely to go on for, up to 12 more months.
And earlier this year, of course, we had the blockage in the Suez Canal with the Ever Given. How does the disruption from that incident compare to this?
I think they are both significant disruptions, but not to be compared beyond that. Of course, blocking a central maritime choke point like the Suez Canal was critical beyond the scope of container shipping. This is very much related to container shipping only and to one port particular, or actually one part of a port. But obviously it's massively disrupting for container lines that have normally the port of Yantian as a port of call along the main lanes from Far East into to Europe, as well as Far East into Mediterranean or Middle East, or even across the Pacific. So of course it's massively disrupting cargoes flowing in and out of Yantian. But what we see right now from many of the great liner companies is that they're basically omitting to call Yantian if possible in order to limit the damage done, of course. So plenty of working with key clients, of course, announcing delays on top of already existing delays into to the supply chains. And right now what we're hearing from some of the main liners is that you should add another 16 days on top of what is already, say, a delayed cargo moving out of the area around Yantian, if it gets moving at all.
Do you think this will have an effect on China's economy and the global economy?
Fortunately not. Our intelligence in the area right now tells us that the situation is easing at the moment, but still, I mean, one thing is that the situation is easing. It has been developing more critical over the past 3 weeks, so it will take time to unwind. I doubt that we will see this in the big numbers from Chinese GDP, but obviously all of those involved in the global supply chain, this being in particular perhaps the small importers, small shippers, but also large-scale shippers. I mean, if they are lacking the key critical goods that they wanted to sell for the Christmas season, and also going back to school season, for instance, in North America, I mean, that is a critical part of your revenue. So obviously there are damage to see in many places from a disruption like this one.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Paradise postponed. The UK votes on delaying easing England's lockdown for another month.
More than 100,000 people in Italy have now died from COVID-19.
The vaccination programme offers some hope for the future, but intensive care units are near capacity.
The Spanish government is hoping to vaccinate over 1 million people by next month.
Living in Germany are struggling with their mental health.
Hungary is supplementing the EU's vaccine rollout, buying doses from Russia and China to speed up the process.
4 million people have tested positive in France.
After a grim winter, the promise of a spring bloom that could mean freedom for millions.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, repeat loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very busy when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Face-to-face, but not eye-to-eye, Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin have met for a high-stakes summit in Geneva. The Russian president says the two countries have agreed to return envoys to their capital cities.
With regards to return of American ambassador to Moscow and our ambassador to Washington, we agreed that they would return to their service, to their duties. As for the timeline, tomorrow or the day after, this is pure technicality.
Portugal has become the first country in the EU to have its national COVID recovery plan endorsed by the European Commission. It unlocks more than $20 billion for the country, with the cash coming from the EU's $910 billion post-pandemic fund. Our correspondent Rahul Pathak is in Madrid. So, Rahul, how does the Portuguese government plan to spend the money?
Oh, hi there, Robin. Well, it'll get around 16.85 billion US dollars in grants and 3.2 billion in loans until 2026, and it plans to give around $6 billion to companies to help them invest in greener production processes, digital tools and skills, things like that. The plan also envisages dozens of investment projects in health, social housing and infrastructure. Now, like Spain, Portugal's economy is really one that needs to diversify, and the pandemic really brought that lesson home. Currently, it's so dependent on tourism, and as a result, the Portuguese economy shrank by 7.6% in 2020. Robin.
And Rahul, Spain's investment plans also under review. We've just seen pictures there of the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who's in Madrid. Is there any indication that Spain's plan will also be endorsed?
Almost certainly. I mean, Spain, we were talking about Portugal's economy. Well, Spain's economy was the one that was hardest hit by the financial fallout from the pandemic. Its economy shrank by 10.8% in 2020. As you correctly say, it'll be the second country to have its spending plans approved. The Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, as you say, is currently meeting with Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commissioner, in Madrid as we speak. Sanchez suggesting that the recovery plan could bring about the biggest change in the Spanish economy since it joined the European Community back in 1986. Here's my report.
A historic agreement, one that could have far-reaching consequences for the economy of Spain. The Next Generation EU Fund was drawn up a year ago as a response to the financial fallout of the pandemic. Its focus on large-scale investment in green energy and digitalisation was initially proposed by Spain and Portugal. 12 months on, the plan is ready to be activated, having formally been agreed upon by all 27 EU member states.
The recovery plan is the most ambitious economic plan in Spain's recent economic history, and therefore I would like to be very clear. This plan is the greatest opportunity for Spain since Spain joined the European Union, and that was 37 years ago. Therefore, opportunities like this only arise a few times a century at most, and this opportunity Spain is not going to let pass.
Now, Spain will be one of the biggest beneficiaries, receiving $167 billion in total, half coming in direct payments, the other half coming in the form of loans and grants spread over 5 years, reflecting the fact that Spain was Europe's hardest hit economy during the pandemic.
And in a way, it goes in line with what many
most other countries in the world are doing when they have the capability of applying significant changes to their economy. So that's what we're seeing now. I mean, both in, for example, China or in the United States or in many other parts of the world. If you're going to be spending all this money, try to spend it on something that will have a long-lasting effect, a long-term effect. And that means probably modernizing your infrastructure, helping on the digitalization.
Another major focus will be the green economy. Spain plans to switch entirely to renewable energy by 2050, with an additional $16 billion set aside to boost electric vehicle use. The government will look to receive its first payment of funds towards the end of the year, just as most EU member states intend to reach a 100% vaccination rate. If this coincides, then the country could expect a much-needed bounce back from the pandemic.
Now, Ursula von der Leyen has described this EU recovery fund as a historic achievement, but in the words of Antonio Costa, who was having his press conference with von der Leyen earlier today in Portugal, the Portuguese Prime Minister, he says the hard work starts now. Back to you.
Rahul Pathak in Madrid, thank you.
The UK Parliament is voting to approve a delay for England's lockdown easing, which had been planned for the 21st of June. The final stage of reopening is being pushed back by 4 weeks amid concern over rising cases of the Delta variant. Our correspondent Paul Barber is following the story.
This vote is something of a formality, an opportunity for MPs to have their say and debate with ministers, but it is expected to be passed with opposition Labour support. A lot of lawmakers from the governing Conservative Party are likely to rebel and vote against the delay, saying it's time to let people make up their own judgments and help the economy recover and get back up on its feet. But the decision has already been made. The great lifting of most COVID restriction measures for England has been postponed by another 4 weeks from June the 21st to June 19th. Limits on the numbers of customers allowed in bars, for example, bars, restaurants and theatres will continue for now, as well as caps on outdoor gatherings at 30 people and 6 for indoors or 2 households. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, says the delay is to give the National Health Service a few more crucial weeks by allowing more time for vaccines to do their job and keep hospitalisations down. They've been rising due to the presence of the more transmissible Delta variant of coronavirus, first identified in India. This delay will be approved by the House of Commons, we do understand, because opposition Labour Party MPs will support it. But their leader, Keir Starmer, was really scathing in Parliament today, saying that the government had squandered the successful vaccine rollout by having what he called a lax approach to border restrictions, allowing the Delta variant to spread in the UK, essentially. He pointed out that on April the 1st, there were 100,000 new cases of COVID a day in India. But the country wasn't placed on the UK's red list until April the 23rd, and in that time 20,000 people came into the UK from India. Well, Prime Minister Boris Johnson pushed back on that today in Parliament.
No, Mr. Speaker, I think that Captain Hindsight needs to adjust his retro spectroscope because he's completely wrong. We put India on the red list, Mr. Speaker, on April the 23rd, and the Delta variant was not so identified until April the 28th, Mr. Speaker, and was only identified as a variant of concern on May the 7th.
Another controversial government move is due to be announced in the next few days. All care home workers treating the elderly will be required to have a COVID vaccination within the next 16 weeks or risk losing their jobs. Now, it might seem obvious that care workers should be vaccinated, and leaders in the care sector say that they do want all employees to get the vaccine, but it's thought around a third haven't taken it up in some areas yet. Now, care home associations say that a blanket rule will potentially exacerbate what is already a staffing crisis. There are already 120,000 vacancies, and they say forced vaccinations could create another 100,000. The sector says it needs government help to encourage and support workers to get jabbed rather than coercing them. Paul Barber, CGTN, London.
Israel has carried out airstrikes in the Gaza Strip, the first since a truce ended 11 days of conflict last month. Israel's newly formed government said it was responding to the launch of incendiary balloons from the territory, which sparked 20 fires in Israel. Hamas, which governs Gaza, said it was retaliating against a march by Israeli nationalists in occupied Jerusalem.
Thousands of people have demonstrated in Greece as a strike against new labour reforms paralysed transport. Over 16,000 people took part in demonstrations in the capital Athens, and another 10,000 marched in the port city of Thessaloniki. Workers fear that a labour reform bill passed by Parliament will reduce workers' rights.
The International Criminal Court has a new chief prosecutor. Karim Khan is a specialist in international criminal and human rights law. The British barrister says he'll reach out to nations that aren't members of the court and try to hold trials in countries where crimes have been committed. He replaces outgoing prosecutor Fatou Bensouda of Gambia.
China says Taishan nuclear power plant is safe following reports of a gas leak. The National Nuclear Safety Administration says it found increased coolant activity in one reactor, but it's functioning within safe limits. The agency also said no leaks were found at the plant in Guangdong in southern China.
Philanthropist Mackenzie Scott has donated nearly $3 billion to hundreds of charities. She became one of the world's richest women when she divorced Amazon's Jeff Bezos in 2019. Scott has now donated more than $8 billion to charity. China is readying for another space exploration milestone. 3 astronauts are set to lift off to help build the country's first space station. CGTN's Ning Hong reports.
3 veteran Chinese astronauts, Nie Haisheng, Liu Boming, and Tang Hongbo, will be the first to visit the core module of China's space station. Nie Haisheng, the commander of the mission, is a veteran astronaut. This will be his 3rd trip into space.
I have a lot of expectations. We need to set up our new home in space this time and test a series of new technologies. So the mission is tough and challenging. I believe with the 3 of us working closely together, doing thorough and accurate operations, we can overcome all challenges. We have the confidence to complete the mission.
Nie Haisheng has the experience of manually operating the Shenzhou spacecraft, and Tang Hongbo, who will be conducting his first space flight, is a senior astronaut who has spent the last 10 years training.
These 3 astronauts will facing a great challenge in space, not only because they will spend the next 3 months in space, but also they will be responsible for the testing of series of new technologies and equipments, including new spacesuits for spacewalk and also robotic arms.
The Shenzhou 12 spacecraft will dock with the Tianhe core module, forming together the Tianhe and the Tianzhou cargo ship.
These technological breakthroughs and capability verifications will lay a solid foundation for the subsequent construction and application of space stations, accumulating valuable experience.
The Tianhe core module is ready to accommodate its first visitors, with 3 independent bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and over 120 kinds of food. A new era awaits Chinese astronauts, who in future will be able to conduct routine operations in space. Ning Hong, CGTN, Jiuquan.
And China and Russia have released details about their cooperation on future space missions, including a plan to build a permanent base on the moon. Russia's Space State Corporation and China's National Space Administration unveiled their plans at the Global Space Exploration Conference in Russia. The series of lunar missions will aim to build a research base at the moon's south pole by the year 2030.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Germany loses its opening match on home turf, but there was no stopping the fans in Munich as they took their seats for Euro 2020.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Murray, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Football, and Germany lost to France in their opening Euro 2020 game on Tuesday. Not the result they wanted, of course.
But for their fans, it was still something of a win, as they were finally allowed back into the stadium after months of empty seats. Natalie Carney reports from Munich.
Football fans across Germany were devastated when the country's COVID regulations closed stadiums to spectators back in October. But with the number of coronavirus cases dropping and vaccinations rising, the return of the UEFA's European Championship, which too was delayed a year due to COVID, has brought life back to empty seats.
15,000 spectators, two big teams. We are totally excited.
Yeah, it's like freedom again, and like going to the stadium. Yeah, it's a good feeling.
At the last minute, the Bavarian government agreed to Munich's Allianz Arena operating at 20% capacity for the three Group F stage games and one quarter-final match it will host, providing strict COVID hygiene measures were put in place.
To get into the stadium, we needed a corona test valid for today, FFP2 masks and a ticket, which we already requested, and we were the lucky ones to have won the raffle.
Of the 14,500 fans allowed into the 70,000-seat arena, about 2,500 were French fans, many driving over from the neighboring country.
We are crazy. To be honest, we are crazy. We want to see the football game. We are like to win, obviously, but we are like to put a show, to see those incredible players playing football. This is awesome.
It's incredible. It feels really great to see everyone. Everyone is happy. There are no words for it. There are no words.
France was tipped to win, but that certainly didn't dampen the excitement of German fans.
From Berlin.
From Berlin. Oh, did you come all the way from Berlin?
Yeah, I came through the bus. It took me 8 hours, but it's totally worth it. I'm here for the game of Portugal as well.
Many Germans would argue that football is just as important to German culture as beer and lederhosen. The reopening of football stadiums across the country to spectators and fans, regardless of the number, have many Germans hoping that the days of Germany's restrictive COVID measures could soon be over.
Prior to the Euro 2020 games, the host city's top football team, Bayern Munich, ranked first in UEFA club ranking, was allowed only 250 spectators. But German fans are hoping that the improving coronavirus situation could lead to a full return to stadiums come August. Germany may have lost to world champions France, with the home team's very own Mats Hummel scoring on his own goal. But fans still walked away feeling victorious, having had the chance to watch their country's team up close and personal again.
All. Football is all.
Natalie Carney, CGTN, Munich.
For days now, the world has been captivated by the journey of a herd of wild Asian elephants trekking through southwest China.
Authorities in Yunnan province are continuing to safety and those of the people in their path. Yang Jinghao reports.
Their every move is under a giant spotlight.
No matter whether they are resting in adorable postures or roaming leisurely in wooded areas, millions of people are tuning in online to follow their adventure. But there's also a much more serious side to it all. A group of what are called elephant chasers report on any worrying developments to a special command center.
It's my first time to engage in a mission of this kind. I've learned some new skills on drone operations and gained some experience, but it's still challenging as we need to conduct round-the-clock monitoring, which needs plenty of energy and physical strength.
These young men are actually firefighters. They say the equipment they use in typical emergencies, such as for firefighting and disaster relief, is helping a lot to monitor the elephants.
Compared with other vertical takeoff and landing drones, this one has a wider flying range, which can be 20 or 30 times that of others.
Their efforts often encounter setbacks, such as bad weather.
There was continuous torrential rain over the past week. It was very difficult for us to fly the drones, so the command center had to send people to search for them on the ground, which is less effective as the mountains are steep.
It can also be a job full of surprises.
The other day when we just got out of the car, we saw one of the elephants poking her head out of an alley. We were somewhat frightened, and it's only about 10 meters away. It was about 2 a.m., and we were all sleepy. Its sudden appearance just refreshed us, like coffee.
Because of their tireless efforts, they are managing to maintain the fine balance between humans and nature.
Having followed them for such a long time, I find they're very lovely sometimes. For example, when they encounter danger, the maternal love the mother elephant shows is just the same as that of human beings. I just hope they can return to their habitat as early as possible and live there happily and healthily.
But before they find their way home, their chasers say they will continue to guard and protect them. Yang Jinghao, CGTN, Yimeng County, Yunnan Province.
Now, he's been described as the godfather of animation. Now, a highly anticipated art exhibition dedicated to Japanese animation giant Hayao Miyazaki has begun at Beijing's Today Museum. The 4-month event displays works from Miyazaki's celebrated animation studio Ghibli, which he founded in 1985.
Miyazaki directed the Oscar-winning film Spirited Away, which is still Japan's highest-grossing movie of all time. The exhibition features nearly 300 copies of drawings and designs from 21 classic Studio Ghibli films.
The headlines again. Face to face, but not eye to eye. Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin have met for a high-stakes summit in Geneva. Speaking afterwards, the Russian president said it was hard to say if relations with the US will improve, though there is a sign of some progress.
With regards to return of American ambassador to Moscow and our ambassador to Washington, we agreed that they would return to their service, to their duties. As for the timeline, tomorrow or the day after, this is pure technicality.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.